Hello wrestling fans. Thanks for tuning in again. Pro Wrestle Machine here, and we are going to get back into Roddy Piper's book. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. In the Pit with Piper by Roddy Piper. Chapter 8. The War to Settle the Score. Besides being a top wrestler in the ring for the WWF at the time, I also became the Federation's main man behind the mic. I was managing two wrestlers, Paul Orndorff and Dr. David Schultz, and one night in 1983 I participated in an interview with them that led Vince to my own segment Piper's Pit, in the WWF. Schultz was kind of a bully who always tried to push his weight around, and Orndorff was wired and tight like the championship racehorse man of war. During their 2-minute and 54-second interview that night, the two burly athletes tried to hog all the mic time, not to mention that these larger-than-life wrestlers were blocking my puny ass from getting any airtime. All the wrestlers who were watching this caught on right away. Schultz and Orndorff went at each other shoulder to shoulder, leaving me lost in the background. Each wrestler had his own share of mic time, with Orndorff going first, then Schultz. They were trying their hardest to get themselves over, while also purposely leaving me in the shadow of their masses. But at the 2-minute 50-second mark with only 4 seconds to go, I stole the show. I put one hand on Orndorff's shoulder from behind, and one hand on Schultz's shoulder from behind, pushed myself right in front of them, now blocking them from the camera, and said with all the charisma I could muster, "Roddy Piper, giant killer." And the interview ended. It was the last thing the viewing audience saw and what they remembered most. My frat brothers also saw it, and they started horse laughing because these two guys who had tried to bury Roddy Piper during the almost 3-minute interview were themselves buried in 4 seconds. This ad-lib not only brought the audience and wrestlers to their knees, it also opened a door for me with Piper's Pit. After that successful ad-lib bit, I approached Vince McMahon Jr. in St. Louis about giving me a shot at an interview segment every week. I told him to give me 3 weeks, a bow tie, and a mic stand, and if I didn't cut the mustard I'd be out of there, no questions asked. What did he have to lose? I tried to show the WWF head honcho that I could better serve him and the company in front of the camera stirring the pot, than in my then current role as a rebel manager. Well, Vince not only bought into the concept hook, line, and sinker, he had the stage crew build me my very own set, which added a bit of glitz and glamour to my segments. One of the main reasons I established Piper's Pit was that there was battle among the wrestlers over how much TV time each person had, and the way it was being designated. Again, remember, you now have 25 of the top wrestlers in the world working in the same federation, vying for the fans' attention, so at some point egos are going to get in the way. The TV time also became an issue because the guys saw it as their opportunity to bring the spotlight on them rather than on Hulk Hogan, whom McMahon was pushing down the wrestling audience's throat. Hogan was capitalizing on Vince's push and his movie fame with Sylvester Stallone in Rocky III, and most guys were convinced that he and Vince had cut a Faust-like deal with the devil. They were partners in crime and all the rest of us were just supposed to be window dressing. But not me. I wasn't going to settle for being second fiddle to anyone. Even when I was managing Orndorff and Schultz, I was still trying to get myself over with the crowd and get recognized. That's when it occurred to me to use my mouth. My big mouth had gotten me noticed earlier in my career in places like LA, Charlotte, Atlanta, Canada, and Portland, so why should New York and the WWF be any different? Again, I was going to stay away from the private family matters of my wrestling guests, but almost everything else was fair game. I wanted to keep my visitors on Piper's Pit off balance, while also keeping the audience entertained. Right from my very first guest wrestler Frankie Williams I went for the jugular, rendering my guests teary-eyed and almost speechless. Although at first it must have seemed odd to see a macho guy in a kilt interviewing another tough guy, they quickly learned that real men do wear kilts. The audience fell in love with Piper's Pit and labeled me the man they loved to hate. They looked forward to me either bringing out the animal in these wrestlers or bringing them to their knees. With Williams, I did the latter. Frankie Williams was a wrestler from San Juan who had been wrestling a long time but had never won a match. So as soon as he sat down for his interview on Piper's Pit, I asked him, "Frankie, where are you from?" And he answered me in his San Juan accent, "I'm from Columbus, Ohio." I turned to him and said, "Oh, you're from Columbus, Ohio, huh? Well, let me tell you something. You ought to go back to Ohio and get a job as a shoe salesman because you stink as a wrestler. You have never won a match in your life." Now this kind of thing was unheard of in wrestling. In a wrestling interview, you usually try to put one guy over as you battle back and forth, but to say you've never won a match, and that you stink had never been done before. It actually tugged at Frankie Williams's pride and he tried to defend himself, explaining to me and the viewing audience why he had never won. "Ia maya navaja via wana macha ina maya life, but every time I go ina there, "Yeah, give my whole hearta," Williams said defensively. And I said to him, "Well, your whole heart ain't enough." And at this point we stand up and I start hitting Frankie to push him backstage through the curtain so I could finish the segment. But Frankie's pride was so hurt that it really turned into a fight. I now had to turn it on boom, 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 to get rid of him, and once I finally threw him out, I turned to the camera and said one of the many phrases that became my trademark: "Listen, you don't throw rocks at a guy that's got a machine gun." The fact that things got so real and so physical on the air was impressive enough, but when I scored at the end with that punchline, it hit the wrestling AP in no time and the ratings started pouring in. With a great buzz and fan reaction to the first Piper's Pit segment, my notoriety was well on its way. Both the fans and the wrestlers now looked at Piper's Pit as a contest to see who would blink first. But I always kept everyone off balance because every time they thought they had all the answers, I changed the questions. This got around the wrestling world very quickly, and before you knew it, kids at university frat houses weren't the only people watching the show. Wrestling had now made its way into the homes of doctors, lawyers, kids, and parents alike. It was now hip to be watching the squared circle sport, especially Piper's Pit. Along with the personality clashes, the beauty of Piper's Pit was that nothing was ever written in stone for the segment. We didn't have the same guests each week and it was strictly improv. Every time it was a new experience for the audience and for me. You could always expect the unexpected, and that's what made it so popular. Piper's Pit was also a forum that allowed the WWF to cross wrestling over into other entertainment industries by bringing on all kinds of talent as guests. One of the first stars to appear on my show was 80s singing sensation Cyndi Lauper, with her manager, Dave Wolf. Both music industry giants were friends of Captain Lou Albano, and they loved watching me on Piper's Pit each week. Well, once I found out that Cyndi was going to be a guest, I went to work, gathering material on the girl that just wanted to have fun. Besides thinking of some witty things to say to her, I had some visual tricks up my sleeve. A la Lauper, I had a clothespin hanging from my ear and had my hair spiked, which generated tremendous heat from the crowd. This would be a very important development because from that point on, Cyndi and Dave Wolf got very much involved in wrestling, and this really turned the rock and roll community onto the sport. But I didn't limit my non-wrestler guests on Piper's Pit to the music industry. One time at an event in Madison Square Garden, John Stossel from 2020 came in to do some interviews, and I had him on Piper's Pit. Once a month we did the show on NBC in place of Saturday Night Live. It was called Saturday Night's Main Event. And while Stossel was on with me, his crony was trying to get an interview with another wrestler, Dr. David Schultz, asking him if wrestling was real or fake. Schultz was now giving the 2020 employee the business big time, and Stossel just cut away from us and said he was going to take care of the situation. Now, I was standing about 15 feet away from them and I saw the cocky TV personality grab the microphone from his associate and tell his crew to turn the cameras on. As soon as his guys were ready to go, Stossel said to Schultz, "Is wrestling real or is wrestling fake?" Well, no sooner did he get out the words that questioned our sport's integrity than he got a huge whack upside the head. Schultz open-handed the 2020 reporter and knocked him down, yelling in his face, "Is that fake, asshole?" He then open-handed him again, and Stossel went down and was nearly crying for his mom. While the incident got Schultz and wrestling a lot of attention from the press, it also ended up costing the WWF and Schultz a bundle after Stossel sued. While the battle between Stossel and the WWF was resolved in the courts, another war was about to take place that brought further attention to pro wrestling. On February 18, 1985, MTV broadcast the war to settle the score live from New York's Madison Square Garden, with Hulk Hogan and me being the main event. In the months leading up to this event, I had played all my cards right. The combination of me being the Federation's #1 heel and the popularity of Piper's Pit, along with my association with Cyndi Lauper and Dave Wolf, made my going head-to-head with Hulk Hogan a no-brainer. During the negotiations for the big event, Wolf was a liaison between Vince McMahon Jr. and MTV. Lauper, who was the female vocalist of the year at the time, was going to be the rock star who would lure music fans to watch the mat sport, and Hogan and I were going to be responsible for carrying the unique event. This presented no problem for the two of us. There was always a natural chemistry between Hogan and me that was second to none. One night we were all in Madison Square Garden and Cyndi and Dick Clark were giving an award to Captain Lou Albano, who had been in the video for her smash hit song Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Well, before Captain Lou could even utter thank you to the two presenters, I came and took the award and smashed it over his head. I then almost caused the youthful-looking Clark's hair to go gray when I turned and stared menacingly in his direction and he screamed, "Please don't hurt me." I decided to give Clark a break, but Cyndi Lauper wasn't so lucky. In typical heel fashion, I went after the poor helpless girl, and without hesitation I ended up kicking her in the head, which drew all sorts of boos and hisses from the crowd. But believe me, things could have been much worse for the colorful singer if I had wanted them to be. Before this whole scenario unfolded on TV, Dave Wolf had asked me if I would kick Cindy during the presentation of the award to Albano in order to get the fans buzzing about the rock and wrestling connection. But he wanted to be reassured that I wouldn't hurt her. I told Dave that I was up to the task and that I could make it look like I really kicked and injured her. But about 30 minutes before the kicking event, a fellow from the WWF's New York office came up to me and planted a vicious seed in my head when he said, "The end of Cyndi Lauper's career could be the beginning of yours." This sat on my mind until the very moment that I had to boot her. There were moral decisions that I had to make. Do I really kick an innocent woman who's going along with a storyline to help promote our sport and who's also trusting me not to hurt her? Do I go against the promise I made Wolf? Or do I punt her so hard that the whole audience feels it, making the WWF brass happy? I truly had a huge dilemma here. The sickness of our sport had once again consumed me, leaving me to ponder what I was going to do to the rock singer when it came time to lay one on her. Do I kick her or don't I kick her? What was it going to be? Even when Cindy stepped through the ropes that night, I had no idea what I was going to do. I knew I had the ability to make it look real if I wanted to, but I was still thinking about what that WWF official said to me about the end of her career could be the beginning of mine. But on the flip side, I was thinking about Cindy's safety and the damage that of one fierce kick could really do. When it came time to land the blow, I threw my leg at Lauper at full speed, but in mid-kick I decided not to hurt her and pulled back. But even though I held back, the audience, including the NYPD, thought I had gone through with it. Believe me, I could have lived with this if I wanted to. I was certainly callous enough, but the bottom line is that I chose not to. The fans thought I really connected, and boy, did it get their attention. No one could believe what they'd just seen. The media also had a field day with this act, as it made the papers and news highlights all over the country. But my sucking music personalities didn't end with that award presentation. Now it was Wolf's turn. A week or so later Dave confronted me in the ring about kicking his client, and I gave him an up-close and personal look at the wrestling canvas when I body-slammed him right before the fans' eyes. I was now not only the guy that fans love to hate, I was also drawing media attention to us like never before. Even though everyone hated my guts, my antics also started a cult of bad guy fans. Wolf got all his friends in the rock and roll community to jump on the bandwagon and write stories about these incidents, and as a result we were on the front covers of music magazines as well as wrestling publications. So now it was all set. My hard work both in and out of the ring forced McMahon's hand to choose me to oppose Hulk Hogan in the war to settle the score main event on MTV. I remember getting off the airplane at Newark Airport and seeing a camera crew from MTV waiting there for me. As soon as a mic was placed in front of me, I let the lady reporter from the music video station know how I felt about her channel. I said that MTV stood for music to vomit by, and she countered my volley by asking me how I felt about hitting a woman. I told her that I was an equal opportunist, and if women got in my way, I'd nail them just like anybody else. This caused quite a stir right before the war to settle the score, which was now going to include not only Cyndi Lauper but also Hulk Hogan's good friend Mr. T. Mr. T was a star on the A-Team at this time and had a pretty good ego going on for himself, not that the rest of us didn't. And Hogan is a great guy and a great businessman, but I don't think either one of us had much love for the other at that particular moment. But we did have one thing in common. We had a mutual friend named Rick Martel. Although we were on opposite sides of the fence, we had both been roommates with Rick Martel at some point in our careers. He had told each of us that the other guy was a decent guy and we both valued Rick's opinion. This was also a time when we were beginning to weed out who was worth risking your reputation for and who was worth trusting in the ring. But what some people don't know is that even after I was told that I was going to help headline this special event, it almost didn't happen. The night of the event, I was in Madison Square Garden and I was asked to take a dive for Hogan, and I said no. This started a time in my career when I wouldn't take dives, wouldn't let anyone pin my shoulders, etc., but I had my reasons. I had worked too damn hard for too long to get to where I was, and I wasn't about to take a fall for anyone. Don't get me wrong, I had no problem with losing to the guy, but not by pinfall. I knew that if Hogan pinned me that night, it would be the end for me. Hogan would just move on to the next heel of the month, and where would that leave me? I wasn't some flash in the pan, so I wasn't about to let that happen. When I approached Captain Lou Albano and told him what had just happened and what I wanted to do against Hogan, he warned me that McMahon and company wouldn't understand. They only saw it as a star-studded match that they had put a lot of money on the line for and didn't care about any other wrestler's career at the time except Hogan's. The captain advised me to stick to my guns and with my aggression and strength never let anyone pin my shoulders. So I held out and told him I would only lose to Hogan by DQ. McMahon and Hogan finally agreed to my demands and the match was ready to roll. I now became king of the disqualifications. The two of us had a lot of energy that night in MSG. I remember I wanted to get under the skin of all the Hulkamaniacs and the MTV viewers before we even started to wrestle, so I wore a Hogan t-shirt, which I ripped off like Hogan as soon as I got in the ring, and I carried a very expensive Gibson guitar, which I smashed right before the crowd's eyes. These antics electrified the fans almost immediately. This was now the new brand of wrestling. No longer was it just a sport of hand-to-hand combat, it was now also a show. It wasn't like winning the Super Bowl, World Series, or an NBA championship, it was a new energy. I remember Gorilla Monsoon behind the mic that night explaining to the viewing audience how the crowd was screaming and yelling for us even before we exchanged a blow. When the bell rang, Hogan and I didn't waste any time, we just charged each other and began trading punches. This set the tone for the wrestling from then on. Hogan and I were able to bring the sport to a whole new level as we combined showmanship and intensity in the ring like never before. There was a legitimate heat and animosity there. There was this 6'7" tan guy with 24-inch arms facing a very real bagpipe-playing kilted 6'1½", 232-pound guy in the ring, and they hated each other. As the match got going, we had the people in the palms of our hands. About 5 minutes into it, I sensed that everyone was in tune with what was going on. Everyone was totally committed, the fans, the wrestlers, and the promoters. As the match came to the 15-minute mark, Hogan was down and I was yanking on his yellow hair, so Paul Orndorff and Mr. T both jumped up and raced into the ring. The outcome of the war to settle the score came down to me sucker punching Mr. T. After landing the lethal blow, a New York City policeman jumped into the ring and grabbed me, but I flung him away. Then all hell broke loose as other policemen rushed to the mat to aid their fellow man in blue. You now had real people getting involved in this historical event. But at the time the cops weren't concerned with being a part of history, all they saw was one of their own being tossed aside like a rag doll before 20,000 people by this crazed man in a kilt. In a matter of weeks I had managed to kick Cyndi Lauper, punch one of the supposed toughest guys in America on national TV, and piss off New York's finest. I was capitalizing on my opportunities, and was also helping put our sport on the map. Hogan and I were definitely in a zone that night in Madison Square Garden because not only did the cops and fans in attendance know the feud was real, but MTV wound up having its highest-rated program of the season. We not only made wrestling and MTV history that night, we also set the stage for wrestling's most historical event, WrestleMania.